is Peter Atkins. Peter is an Emeritus Professor of Chemistry at the University of Oxford. He's a patron of Humanists UK and an Honorary Associate of the National Secular Society. He's written textbooks on chemistry and popular books on science, including Galileo's Finger, the 10 Great Ideas of Science, and On Being, a Scientist's Exploration of the Great Questions of Existence. And today he is going to answer all of the great questions of existence. So that's why you're here, to find the answers. So please give a big warm welcome to Peter.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to come to this obviously very vigorous society. And if you don't all walk out as you listen to what I have to say. Indeed.
Is that okay? Disappointed? Yes. Where's Bill gone?
Well, let's see.
Well,
Let's just do a sound check. Do you want to just say?
I start again. But I don't intend to be controversial anyway, so I intend, in fact, just to argue in favour of the view that our current conventional science is the only mode of understanding the world, and that we must beat off all attempts at contamination by sentiment and religion and any other pretender to the truth. I'll acknowledge science is dead to religion, because religion initially fostered the search for understanding. But I shall argue that religion has had its day, that science has taken wing, and that the only reliable mode of understanding and investigating the world is through science. Now, science is the consummation of the Renaissance. It represents the current apotheosis of humanity's climb from bewilderment and fear in the face of nature to our current extraordinary but still partial position of control and understanding. All humanity should take joy from the fact that the human mind is so sharp an instrument that it can cut knowledge from the heavens, illuminate the obscure, and that it can displace prejudice and expose truth. Science has achieved this position by adopting an extraordinarily simple technique, that of experiment allied with openness. It has consolidated its position as the only true path to reliable knowledge by adopting as its principal tool the dispassionate language of mathematics. Now, science is built on error. Unlike some other supposed approaches to knowledge, where errors can be kept secret and sometimes even used as the basis of new claims, the errors that science makes will inevitably be found out. That is the source of its strength. There is, of course, no possibility of error in art. The absence of even the possibility of error renders any claim of art to be an alternative approach to comprehension as absurd. The possibility, indeed likelihood, that science makes mistakes, and that those mistakes are exposed, is a measure of its progress. Error in religion is dealt with not by rational argument, for how can one fantasy dominate another in argument, but by the sword, the stick, and the bomb. It is an illustration of the strength of the scientific method, the controversy that raged a few years ago when two chemists, claimed that they had achieved nuclear fusion in a test tube, much to the chagrin of the physicists, who at that stage had failed to achieve it in an apparatus of the greatest complexity. Their claim, and I was present when they made their public claim, sent a ripple of delight around the world. Here was a source of clean, inexhaustible energy. had that been a claim made by a religious person to have seen a miracle, for instance, then that would have been that. There was such an urgent desire for it to be true that the miracle, had it been a miracle, would have been accepted unthinkingly and with gratitude. However, the claim was within science, and as such, it had to be subjected to scientific adjudication. Over several weeks of my diligent experiments around the world, the claim was shown to be false. The original claimants, one of whom came from not far from here, just up the road, had simply performed sloppy experiments, had jumped to the wrong conclusions, and had allowed the lure of fame and fortune to trample on the careful procedures that science has developed. Had the observation been those of the faithful and devout, the sort of observation that gets people beatified, it would have been accepted with little scrutiny and accepted as a part of the fabric of faith. Let me summarize what I believe to be the attitudes of contemporary science. The deepest driving force of science is the belief that the world is simple and that the perceived complexity of the world, wonderful as it is, simply bubbles out of that underlying simplicity. Scientists are hewers of simplicity out of complexity. They believe that deep down the world is exceptionally simple, but accept that events are linked together in an awesomely complex network. Scientists stand in awe at the wonder and glory of the world, but their awe is not directed at the complexity itself. It is directed at the realization that simple, underlying, fundamental phenomena can have ramifications of truly amazing grandeur. Scientists burrow beneath the amazing, delightful, and sometimes terrible phenomena of the world and discover that they are the outward show of an inner simplicity. They believe that they have discovered a method of exposing the inner simplicity of the world. That is the journey that science makes. Let me say just a few words about the great steps forward in science that support my view that science itself is on the track of deep simplicity. Modern physical science began with Galileo's carefully considered experiments and Newton's extraordinary discovery that observed phenomena can be mapped onto mathematics. Unfortunately, Newton's success, great as it was, became deeply ingrained in the hearts and minds of physicists, and they came to think that anything that conflicted with it was somehow paradoxical. In particular, when quantum mechanics was formulated just about 100 years ago, early in the 20th century, its failure to map perfectly onto the expectations of classical physics led to the view that somehow it was incomplete. The worst manifestation of this view arose from the minds of those who took Heisenberg's uncertainty principle as implying an inescapable limitation of knowledge. Newton and his immediate heirs had taught us to expect to account for the paths of particles in terms of their locations and their velocities. The uncertainty principle denied us this simultaneous information, and hence quantum mechanics was interpreted by some, Einstein among them, as allowing only a frustratingly incomplete picture of the world. However, a much more optimistic interpretation of the uncertainty principle, and one more in the spirit of what I'm trying to convey, is that it exposes a fallacy in classical physics, a fallacy of the coarseness of the farmyard, a fallacy that by our casual inspection of everyday bodies has led us into the error of supposing that position and velocity were simultaneously specifiable. Classical physics and our farmyard conditioned gut feeling is simply wrong. Quantum theory says we have to choose. We have to choose a mode of describing the world. We have to choose to speak in terms of positions. Or we have to choose to speak in terms of velocities. If we use these two complementary descriptions of the world simultaneously, then we can expect nothing but confusion where they clash. In other words, quantum mechanics exposes a simplicity in the world. Discuss the world in terms of the positions of particles, and it is serenely simple. Discuss the world in terms of the velocities of particles, and it is also serenely simple. But discuss the world in terms of both positions and velocities, which is what classical physics instructs us to do. A violent storm then rages. Concepts are out of joint, and cracks in explanations occur, and there is a clash of incompatibles. Another exposure of the simplicity of the world is the discovery of the, wait for it, statistical interpretation of the second law of thermodynamics. Whereas many regard the second law as a bottomless well of mathematical obscurity, I regard it as a great liberator of the human spirit. I'm not going to burn you with its details, except to remind you that broadly, loosely, but actually quite accurately speaking, it's a law that says that everything is getting worse. More precisely, the second law implies that all natural change in the world is accompanied by an increase in disorder. The world is slipping naturally and inevitably into chaos. By chaos, I mean a greater disorderly dispersal of matter and energy. That's when a gas expands to fill the available volume. Its molecules are becoming dispersed over that volume by their chaotic motion. When a hot object cools to the temperature of its surroundings, the violent motion of atoms and spreads out into the surroundings. And the astonishing feature of the second law is that it exposes the heart of natural change as being nothing more than this slide into chaos. All change, whatever its form, is a consequence of the natural decay of order. What people find it hard to accept is that such purposeless decay can have as a consequence the construction of wonders. Once again, we have to accept that a simple skeleton is coated in complex flesh. Here the skeleton is the unstoppable tide of chaos that rises the world, sinks ever more and unstoppably into chaos. The flesh that conceals the skeleton is the extraordinary complexity of the interconnection of matter in the world. The descent into chaos is not a uniform stream. It's more like a choppy rapid. A plunge into disorder here may throw up a structured, transitory spray of structure somewhere else. As a flower or an opinion may be generated as the world slumps further into chaos. The fact that the power behind the deed is decay into corruption doesn't mean that the deed is not exquisite or the opinion extraordinary. All it means is that we have discovered an underlying simplicity in the world, science has achieved its goal again. The essential procedures of science is to identify fragments of the world, to isolate them as much as possible from other fragments, and to subject those fragments to close and careful scrutiny. Such scrutiny takes place in as public a manner as possible, for truth must transcend prejudice, be that prejudice personal, political, cultural, religious, racial, national, or even human. It's that something like bursting out of the shackles of overt and perhaps unrecognized prejudice that is one of science's most glorious gifts to the human condition. I am, of course, exhibiting no such prejudice. Although scientists strip off the wings better to study the butterfly, the process we call reductionism, it's an essential part of the task of science to patch together the fragments that have been elucidated and attempt to reassemble the whole. The term reductionism has too often been misinterpreted and called naive. How can the butterfly be appreciated, say its critics, in terms of its individual atoms? But pure dissection is not the sole aim of a scientific reductionist. Scientists are in fact better regarded as assemblists. They believe that to understand a part of the universe, be it an atom, a butterfly, or a brain, it's essential to understand the function of its components. However, they also believe that with the components understood, it is essential to begin to understand how the whole functions when the components are put back together. There is an essential step towards a holistic understanding, but a holistic understanding that is built on firm foundations. They, of course, don't expect to be able to predict an actual opinion, an act or a deed from the arrangement of molecules in the brain, but just to be able to claim that they have resolved its mechanism when they understand its workings. Assembling is very difficult indeed. It may be the case that discovering the interactions of underlying simplicities and understanding how they emerge as observable phenomena may be much more difficult than discovering the underlying simplicities themselves. One of the sources of confidence in science as a mode of understanding is its self-consistency. There's no geological fault line where concepts that have emerged from one branch of science lie next to those that have emerged from another branch. Indeed, we are increasingly seeing that concepts that have been cultivated in one region of science are necessary to explain another, seemingly remote part of science. The best example is the current need for cosmologists who study the enormous to use elementary particle physics, the study of the exceedingly small, to account for the global properties of the entire universe, the rivers of the very great and of the very small do not clash when they meet, but prove mutually supportive. This mutual consistency and mutual dependence must be a sign that modern science is in fact close to the bedrock of truth. Incidentally, it also provides a sound basis for disbelief in miracles of all kinds. Science is such a mutually interdependent reticulation of ideas that a bomb going off anywhere among the concepts will inescapably destroy the entire edifice, even in intellectually distant regions. One ghost, one virgin birth, one Gadarene swine, one molecule of wine from one molecule of water, one levitation, one inexplicable phenomenon is enough to destroy the whole of modern science. Can science illuminate everything? The so-called great questions of being are the very stuff of religion, although it's striking how little progress has been made with them for over 10,000 years. I'd like to argue that science is capable of answering all the great questions of being, as well as the little ones, such as the swing of a pendulum and the nature of inheritance. We have to be careful, though, to distinguish real questions among these great questions from inventions that lead nowhere. There's no point, for instance, in wasting time on meaningless great questions, however important they might seem to some people if they are empty inventions. Needless to say, such phantom questions are what occupy the religious, and because they have no answers, result in their great frustration. In other words, as they would put it, their increased admiration for the inscrutability and unknowability of the mind of God. Of course, there are a lot of questions relating to existence, but I believe that all but 2 or 3 of them are manifestations of people's anxieties and their inability to come to terms with the prospect of their own annihilation. They are human inventions, personal anxieties, worries about what happens when you die. Is there a hell? Indeed, is there a heaven? Is there a purpose? Is there a God? They are not deep questions about the nature of the universe. They are windows onto individual minds, not serious questions about physical reality. Of course, such questions might worry an individual a lot, but that doesn't mean to say that they are profound questions. In general, they are just personal worries stimulated by surrounding cultures. A truly great question is where it all came from. That is, what was the nature of the events that took place at the inception of the universe? Of course, we scientists have to admit that we cannot yet explain how the universe came into existence. Oh, the religious can, of course. It was done by God. Scientists are not content with religion's clear answer, for it is not really an answer. It's an admission of defeat. It seems to be a simple answer, but it's really a slogan that ascribes to an unknown entity of extraordinary complexity a monumental act of unspecified fabrication of colossal proportions. In short, it's a sneaky lie that looks positive, but is in fact empty. Scientists can't do much better at the moment, but can avoid the misrepresentation of their ignorance. They are steadily beavering away and can trace the history of the universe with some confidence to within fractions of a second, less than a millisecond, after its inception. They are also exploring events much closer to the origin, and are not without speculative thoughts about what went on actually at the event we call the creation. You might object that my belief that science will come up with an explanation of the intervention-free, spontaneous origin of the universe is just a matter of faith. I have to agree. However, I see no sign that science has ever encountered a barrier to progress, and base my view of its competence on its extraordinary success so far. You should, for example, compare the progress that scientists have made with this awesome question over the past 100 years with the complete lack of progress that religion has made over the past 10,000 years. You should also contrast the attitude of science that a publicly accessible answer will be found and be open to a test of some kind with the religious view that yes, an answer will be found, but it will be comprehensible only when you are dead. I prefer knowledge this side of the grave, and I prefer an attitude that respects, not scorns, the power of the collective human intellect. And it's with the question about cosmic origin that science shows the severity of its own criteria. All the folk versions of cosmogenesis have no criterion of success. All Genesis myths are fanciful allegories. They are cast in such vague language that their adherents will always be able to claim that they were right all along. However, in reality, they are empty but poetically entrancing musings. They have no predictive power, no explanatory power, and at best are commentaries on society's beliefs. Contrast these musings about our origins with what science has been able to achieve and with the criteria that it sets up to gauge its success. Science, as I indicated, can now take you back with reasonable reliability to a millisecond or so after the inception of the universe. If you strain your credibility a little, but not beyond breaking point, so remain within the language of current science, you can also follow the universe back to its form about almost a trillionth of a second, trillionth of a second after its inception. It's a wonderful achievement of science and a monument to the awesome power of the human intellect that we can trace our story back so far. Currently we cannot go further, but there is absolutely no reason to suppose that we need give up at this stage. We have every expectation that science's awesome sword will go on slicing through the fabric of the heavens and expose to us what happened at the inception of the universe. And how will we know that we have the correct account of what took place? What are the criteria of success? They are the harshest of all. I believe that science will have failed unless it can show how the universe came into being from absolutely nothing. Not even empty space-time. If it finds that there needed to be a seed even the size of a proton, or a seed of any other infinitesimal size, then science will have been defeated. The only acceptable version of cosmogenesis must involve, in my view, an initial void, a space without anything. No space, no time. Then, with that criterion satisfied, there will be an even more severe criterion to pass. All the fundamental particles and all the forces must emerge without intervention, for intervention is death to science. The tumbling out of the void must have taken place without the hand of any entity for science to be complete. It must account for the entire universe springing without cause from absolutely nothing. Contrast that criterion with the soft, flabby criteria, if any, of the armchair versions of the creation, and you'll see why I consider science to be infinitely superior intellectually to any other mode of description of the nature of physical reality. The phantom good question is the purpose of the creation. The religious are much exercise about the reason why God made the universe, and have come up with all manner of manifestly potty speculations. The scientific view, in fact, I can allow myself to embrace a little bit of metaphysical speculation for a moment, is that the universe is totally purpose-free. There is no evidence that it has any purpose whatsoever. Why should there be a purpose? Science can advance all its explanations without invoking the concept of purpose. A universe without a purpose is just as glorious as one with a purpose, especially if the exposure of humans to death, disease, and fear is one of those purposes. I think it's rather wonderful to think of all there is, this great cosmos, just hanging there, totally without purpose. Now, I hear you calling foul. I hear you saying that I'm dismissing thousands of years of philosophical effort with a superficial wave of the hand. Indeed, I am. It's not my fault that philosophers and theologians invented a rather quaint question and then spent lifetimes pondering it. Bertrand Russell, of course, as you well know, compared this sort of fountain question with the proposition that there is a teapot in orbit between the Earth and Mars. If theologians propose that there was one, should philosophers spend a lifetime arguing about why the teapot was there? And should we spend a fortune looking for it? It is indeed an extremely important question, because if there is indeed a teapot in orbit, then our worldview would be utterly transformed. But do you think we should spend any time on the question? And if not on the teapot question, then on the purpose question. Now, not far removed from the purpose/teapot question is the fount of goodness question. The religious claim that the notion of a God provides a foundation for morality, that an atheist is a mastless ship in a tossing storm, driven hither and thither between the twin rocks of sin and evil. First, of course, it's not at all clear to me that God is a universal inspiration for good. At a low level, the evolution of species and the terrors of the natural world are not, to my mind, convincing evidence for the mind of a loving God. Would you, if you loved all things, allow the terrors of the savannah, the jungle, and the ocean? That having been said, and explaining away human evil in terms of free will, and explaining natural disaster as some twisted test of faith, and allowing that many, but far from all, the religious are inspired to perform acts of love and altruism, there remains the question of whether it is possible to be a good atheist, or should you never turn your back on one. I rather hope that an atheist can be good, and I suspect that being a good atheist is a rather more noble occupation than being a good believer. An atheist is good for whatever reason and in whatever sense, not because he or she is a God-fearing or expects brownie points that in due course can be cashed in at heaven's gate, but because some, at least, have a code of behavior. And the origin of that code is extraordinarily difficult to identify, but difficulty doesn't mean impossibility. You should always beware of superficial simplicities, such as the assertions of divine grace or whatever. I suspect that the origin of the code has three components, none of them divine. One is our evolutionary history, where the actions that have resulted in the emergence and survival of our species and its social structures have molded our behavior at an unconscious level. Another is a consequence of our big brains, which allow us to identify, to some extent, and reflect on, in certain quiet circumstances, the consequences of our actions, which may allow us to transcend the ready tooth and claw responses that evolution alone might urge on us, as in the application of the death penalty for social transgression. A third is social conditioning, where we impress from an early age with certain norms of behaviour. Now, I think it's far better to understand the origins of human behaviour than merely to conform to what our elders would impose upon us and to appeal to written folk anthologies, namely the holy books. These are all big questions, but I have to assert that in my view, it is better to discover knowledge by perfectly accessible experiment rather than introspective speculation. That science is therefore infinitely superior to ancient written authority when it comes to discovering the workings of the world, and that distasteful as it might seem, science is capable of elucidating the spiritual, and through biology, psychology, and anthropology, explain why so many people still take the easy option and believe in God. And given that science can answer all proper questions of existence, what are the consequences of eliminating the false claims of religion? Even if science doesn't go as far as I hope for the foreseeable future, what are the consequences of accepting science as the only window on the constitution, properties, and purpose of the universe? Now, I think I would prefer to be an inhabitant of a country where rational principles govern behaviour, rather than codified rules based on folk memories or the tribal behaviour of long ago. However, my suspicion is that, except in certain cases, that country would not be all that different from most countries on earth today. First, written authority is largely followed practice, and the rules pervading religious books are largely codifications of experience. Societies have evolved in a manner akin to natural selection, and societies have not discovered rules of behaviour that result in, and the societies that have not discovered rules of behaviour that result in their survival have perished, and we no longer have such societies among us. Everyday life is so complicated that it is inevitable that there are various modes of survival, just as there's not just one book on how to do gardening. And hence, we can understand the emergence of various religions in the world, and approximations to perfect modes of survival. They represent the occupation of different ecological niches in the world, if you like, different ethological niches. All of them retain some of the vestiges of their past, just as human fetuses have gills. What science enables us to do is to strip away some of the more historical aspects of the rules by showing that they are remnants of the past, or simply out of line with the truth. Thus we can strip away the laws of behaviour based on the prospects of eternal life, reincarnation, divine retribution, condemnation to hell, and all the other absurd human inventions propagated so lovingly by religions. Another consequence of a more fully scientific appreciation of the world is the increase, in my view, in our sensitivity towards it. There is nothing special about human beings, apart from what we like to think of as our greater intelligence. We are merely outcrops of the inorganic substratum of the world. And with luck, that sensitivity could could make us more accepting of the whole of nature. If there are great personal lessons to learn from science, then the world is comprehensible, but finite. It is finite personally. There can be no persistence of a soul after death. There is no soul, except metaphorically, even in the midst of life. So how can it persist, except metaphorically, after death? I believe in immortality, but it is the immortality of Mozart in music, of Newton in physics, and Tutankhamun in tourism. The world is finite also cosmically, for we can be reasonably confident that all that lies in the far distant future of the cosmos is dead, flat space-time. And all our achievements will be as though they had never been. Religion, as I'm sure most of you here would agree, is a deception, an opiate. It scorns the capacity of humans to understand. Humanity certainly owes a debt to it, as I said in my opening remarks, but it is a debt, and it should not be a shackle. Religion falsifies our future. Science enriches it by elucidating it and giving us the tools to understand. The worst possible future for science is that it should become contaminated by mysticism, poetry, wishful thinking, sentiment, religion, or any other form of politically correct intrusion from outside the stark procedures of science itself. These procedures are carefully controlled, repeatable experimentation within the framework of theory. The construction of testable theories under the guidance of experimental observations and an openness of discourse. It is absolutely essential that there should be no seepage into science of anything sentimental. Sentiment is a disease of true science. In the world of explanation and comprehension, there is no doubt in my mind that science, and science alone, is king. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. There's a lot of stimulating content there, and I'm sure we'll have some questions. But does anyone want to go first with a question that might be bubbling up? Yes, John. Okay. I'll bring this to you, and then I'll get Phil to do. Thank you very much, Phil. You said that science is built out of error, or built on error, which you publicly refuse. For you, what's the most interesting scientific error that has been questioned and turned over in terms of the history of science?
I think it might be one that I mentioned about Newtonian mechanics is wrong in almost every respect. It's wonderful, but wrong. At tiny levels, it's wrong because it insists upon speaking in terms of incompatible observables, as I referred to, position and velocity. And it's wrong on a big scale because it gets gravity wrong. And for that we need Einstein and whatever follows Einstein. So it's colossally wrong, but wonderfully useful, and an essential step in the slow migration towards truth.
Okay, and David is next.
Thank you. As a fellow physical chemist, very interesting talk. One thing you didn't mention was the impending catastrophe of climate change, which is partly brought about by science and technology, burning things, synthesizing chemicals, raping the planet, plus population growth. What worries me is that we seem to be driving towards the cliff edge, looking in the mirror. How do we as humanists and citizens respond to this? And if we want to tackle climate change, do we take anybody on board, religious people, anything? Because we're now in a crisis situation.
I hate to be pessimistic, but I think we're coming to an end of ourselves. And I see no will to reverse that tendency. The root cause, of course, is population growth. We're happy to put fluoride in the water. I think we should put bromide in as well. But it's the burgeoning of the population which leads to climate change, ultimately. To the consumption of raw materials, to waste, to pollution, everything. So I think the root cause is population growth. If we can tackle that by means other than famine and world war, although those might be a last resort, then we have a chance of saving the planet. But if we don't tackle that, I'm afraid that the planet will die. I think if it dies, we have to prepare ourselves for immortalizing, I can use that phrase, our knowledge. So we need to send our knowledge out into the universe somehow, so that one day it might make landfall and flourish. But I'd hate to think that everything that we have achieved would be totally lost.
So, just to add a small comment. So, do you think that people who live in the Ganges Delta are fellow citizens and equals to us?
Well, of course. What's the point of that question?
Would just our responsibility to help them to survive, as though their survival instinct and mine is exactly the same.
Yeah, they're people. I mean, people with the same aspirations, I presume, although I'm never quite sure of other people's aspirations, the same as we have. Certainly we should do what we can, but we should also encourage everyone not to breed,
like Malthus did.
Well, he was, in a sense, right.
Okay, could you take that one to Paul?
Well, it must be said that science is keeping in advance of famine so far, which Malthus would not anticipate.
The point that strikes me is the fact that we have developed mentally and in all aspects, and we've come to this point where we think that we're destroying the planet, right? My belief is that we're not destroying the planet. I agree that we should reduce population to extend the human occupation of this sphere, but we are a drop in the ocean of the life of this sphere and the universe. This world has been through, 3 or 4 ice ages before. We've had catastrophes like the dinosaur Chicxulub asteroid, which cut out 75% of life forms. We seem to assume that we've got some sort of superior right, and we're going to carry on and we're going to be here. But we're a drop in the ocean of the whole evolution of a planet that's been billions and billions of years developing and cooling. And the point is, we're a spectacle, an absolute micron in the whole universe. But we are so conceited that we think we're changing the universe the way we're driving motor cars. We're not helping the living conditions of humans on this planet, but we're not changing the evolution of the planet in the whole, in my view.
Well, as far as we know, we're the only creatures that are moving towards understanding the nature of the fabric of reality. And it would be, I think, really sad if our ability to do that was terminated and indeed lost. So although we might think that a cockroach has an equal right to life, it doesn't understand very much. And I don't think we have to worry too much about preserving cockroaches. But I do think we have to try to understand and preserve understanding. And it may well be, almost certainly is the case, that out there in other galaxies, there are people saying much the same thing as I'm saying, or did say it before they were shortly wiped out. But if there's no communication between us and them, it's like painting the Mona Lisa and never showing it to anyone.
Yeah, but at this moment we're in the organic stage of human beings.
Yeah.
And give it another 100, 150 years, we probably could be in the mechanical stage.
I quite agree. And I think that going back to the other question, in the sense that to embed our understanding in some kind of inorganic substratum, because who needs a spleen? I mean, the spleen is helpful to get this far, but you don't really need it once you've got this far. Yeah.
I'll ask a question then and wait for it. No, if you can give me the mic.
No,
so you've got a question. Oh, sorry. Keep going.
Thank you very much, Professor. That's a wonderful talk, and I agree with almost everything. I just wanted to make a little technical point. You said every science is aiming towards more simplicity all the time, but it seems to me, from a physics point of view, it's not quite like that, because we've got to a point where we've tried to look at smaller and smaller particles, and now it branches out into something enormously complicated in string theory and the various explanations that go beyond quarks and fundamental particles of matter. So is it not true that we're not really succeeding in making things, in finding out that the universe is extremely simple? We're just imposing a picture of simplicity at whatever level we look at.
Well, first of all, you have to decide what you mean by simplicity. But also, I think it's undeniable that the closer you get to deep understanding, the world is appearing simpler. Take, for example, the forces of nature, the electric force, the magnetic force, the weak force, the strong force, and so on. The view is that these are probably all manifestations of a single force that simply have acquired different strengths as the universe cooled. So if you go back to fractions of a second after the inception of the universe, all the forces have the same strength. The universe cooled, and we now think of the strong force as being very, very strong, the weak force as being very, very weak. And so they've separated out. Now, I think to think of them as a single force and to separate it out through cooling is a simplification.
Yes, I think that's a good example. But I was thinking of another example. You mentioned Newton's laws, which are rather simple. They simply explain mechanics, and then actually, as we go further down into smaller scales, we find that mechanics is much more complicated than that.
Well, I don't think it is more complicated. It might be harder to do the maths, but the conceptual understanding is becomes easier. I think, for example, one of the principles of classical mechanics is the principle of least action. Okay? That a particle takes the path that involves least action, which has a technical definition, but you can think of it as a measure of its effort. That's called effort. So it takes the path of least effort. Now, how does it know before it sets out that the path that it has selected will be the one that is involves the least effort? And it changes its mind halfway through because it discovers that there is another path. It is a waste of its effort to go back and retrace it. So how does a path know in classical mechanics what is going to be the path of least effort? And what I think quantum theory does is to allow you to understand. And the explanation is, and I won't go into the detail, but the explanation is that the particle takes every conceivable path. And every conceivable path, except that one path, has neighbours that washes it out. So it goes everywhere. The basis of law, in many cases, is anarchy. So I think that provides you with an understanding. Even though the maths is complicated.
Okay, I'll save my questions because Paul is waiting and also Graham. So go around to Paul and then Graham.
Thank you very much for the talk. On a slightly more prosaic level, my question is more or less about funding. You'll know better than I, but I understand that some 80% or a very large proportion of scientific funding in the West is following the purposes of either multinationals or government departments such as the Ministry of Defence. So whilst the universe perhaps doesn't have purpose, most of our scientific effort certainly does, and it's not necessarily in the common interest. Should we be concerned?
Well, not entirely in agreement with you. If you take somewhere like CERN, which costs millions every year and outweighs expenditure in other branches, that is a non-military, non-corporate endeavour, which is really seeking fundamental knowledge for its own sake. Indeed, that fundamental knowledge might be applied to nefarious purpose, but at least the intention of those who work on it and those who fund it is primarily understanding. Secondly, I mean, we do have the urges of weaponry war in general, to thank for many of the advances that we make when people are driven by the prospect of annihilation to invent and to discover. Maybe you might deplore the motivation, but you should at least applaud the outcome.
Thank you.
One area of science that we don't seem to address is what is now, between the past and the present, and what is consciousness in now. And the chances of winning the lottery are 1 in a million. Chances of me being here are 1 in 10 to the 2,600. That puzzles me. And I don't see anywhere in science yet an answer to those sort of questions. I don't even know what category they're in.
Well, let's unpick the question. Consciousness. two big questions left for science to answer. One is where it all came from, as I touched on, and the other is how we understand where it all came from, that is consciousness. And I think, whereas the former will be asked by formulating equations of great simplicity, but difficult to pursue, the latter, the nature of consciousness, will be answered by simulating it. And we're edging towards being able to simulate it through a variety of different types of computer. Not necessarily digital computer, possibly quantum computer and so on. So I think the answer to the nature of consciousness and all that implies, which includes judging what is beautiful, judging what is right, all will come down to simulating consciousness, I think, in some kind of computer. As to your other question, which I've now forgotten,
scientific equations don't have narrow, they just have
scientific equations have time in them, but the problem with the equations that we've got is that they seem to be reversible with time. And so why are we moving forward in time rather than backwards in time? But if we're moving backwards in time, we might think that we were moving forwards in time anyway, so maybe there is no distinction. I mean, there are serious questions about time. One is it linear? Or are we just experiencing what seems like time moving unidirectionally, whereas in fact it's some fragment of a great big circle? And there's no evidence one way or the other. It's quite conceivable that there was no beginning to the universe, because time is circular and did not have a beginning. I mean, these are deep questions. These will be answered. At the moment, we are presuming that time is somehow linear.
Bill, sorry, come this way. Simon and then Chris.
Thank you for the very interesting talk. They say that you can't move from an is to an ought in describing the world. And while your exposition of the triumphs of science is extremely impressive, as human beings, we're currently the masters of the planet and changing it. And issues like moral philosophy, political philosophy, even economics, are going to be crucial. And it just strikes me that your claim that science has the answers for everything seems to go slightly too far to me.
Well, I'm not sure what other answers there could be if it weren't evidence and the consensual interpretation of evidence. I mean, what else is there? I mean, you can't just sit there and pray and hope that an answer comes to you. You've got to go out and try to think rationally, and what science really embodies is the rational, and that's all. I mean, a possible ought question, going back to what you talked about maybe earlier, is that should the human race annihilate itself, having made sure it has built appropriate libraries to keep its knowledge intact for whatever follows it. And one could pursue that question, I suppose. And I think people could argue that the sooner it does so, the better.
Thank you, Peter, for your talk. I've read several of your books. I think you've written about 4 books on the nature of beginnings of the universe. And so your latest one's Conjuring the Universe, that's last year. And you mentioned in the book that you thought that the laws of nature spring from nothing more than indolence, anarchy, and ignorance. Perhaps
perhaps you could explain to me a little bit about those.
Yes, the question was, I didn't hear the question, but the question was, would I give another lecture now on the origins of the laws of nature? I went to the origin of that book, other than the origin of the laws of nature, was a lecture I went to by a well-known and must be anonymous philosopher of the Christian religion, who said that it was quite clear that the simplest explanation of the origin of the laws of nature was that God pushed every electron in the right direction all the time. I felt there was probably a simpler explanation, and he had better things to do, like ridding the world of his mistake in creating smallpox and things like that. And so I set about thinking, how could the laws of nature emerge? And I adopted, as you mentioned, three principles. One is indolence. When the universe comes into existence, absolutely nothing happens. And so space-time inherits the properties of the absolute void that preceded it. The second principle was anarchy. That if you allow everything to happen, as I alluded to a few moments ago, if you allowed absolutely everything to happen, then you would find that laws emerged, because most of what was allowed to happen was self-annihilating. And thirdly, ignorance was a last resort of feeble minds. But if you don't know something, what can emerge from not knowing something? And I showed that all sorts of little laws of nature emerge that way. Indeed, the laws of electromagnetism effectively emerge from not knowing anything. So, and I felt that using those three principles was much more in the spirit of science, presuming the existence of an overworked God.
Thank you. Thank you.
Phil, the gentleman at the front, I think. Oh, and then you.
I was very interested in a comment which one of the other questioners raised just now about the relative importance of science in the world and the importance given to leading scientists. I'd like you to comment on a couple of other things, and that one of those would be the ability to influence the world. We all have that ability all the time to change the universe, and the universe surely then will return that in a sense and influence us. If we took to sort of reduce it to, if we play a part in changing the world or the local community even, then that is reflected back. The point is, we do have a point. The other one is, I think you could perhaps give some importance to subjective, not objective communication, because the world doesn't change necessarily as a result of scientific research and development. I think a lot of information and exchange is subjective. And if you took all of the people in this room tomorrow and asked them exactly what took place in here, you might get 20 or 30 descriptions. And it would be hard to find a scientific description of what took place today.
Oh, yeah. Well, let let me deal with influence first of all. I think there are two levels of influence. One is to demonstrate that science provides an understanding of the fabric of reality. And I think that is very important, so that science can show you, yeah, it's a wonderful world, but we can understand it. I think that is of crucial importance in the world, to spread understanding. And I think also at a more practical level, go back to climate change. I mean, scientists the world over are trying to influence governments to take action. And so for one of the most sort of pressing problems of our time. And so scientists are doing what they can, but the forces, economics, and politics in general are against them so often. But we've got to keep working at it, because we know the truth. And we, in a sense, know the solution. Second point, giving to you again, the subjectivity. Yeah, absolutely. But I think that is the domain of psychology and indeed anthropology to explore. So although we might not be able to predict everyone's opinion, I think it's very interesting to see how opinions evolve. And indeed, sort of generalizing them slightly, we know that the great persuaders of, as we believe, nonsense are the religious, but they've got a great way of encouraging people to think in a particular way. And so we should perhaps form an unholy alliance with the religious in order to get our ideas across until we're safely secure enough to dump them. So they could be a useful bridge to achieve understanding. For example, I mean, to get evolution and natural selection accepted in some of the more theocratic countries like the United States of America, to get priests on your side to show that it's consistent with what they regard as the will of God is a very good first step in seducing people from creationism.
You mentioned earlier the word rationalise earlier. Now, do you mean ways of thinking? And someone said to me once, we have to rationalise in order to stay sane. That to rationalise is to make excuses. Now, is there any relevance in that?
No, sorry, I don't think the rationality of science is science making one big excuse.
I don't mean about your knowledge. I mean,
no.
we as individuals, this is what I'm trying to say, that our mind is our best friend, but it's also our worst enemy, because we kid ourselves.
Yeah, but science is a collective pursuit of knowledge, and it moves forward by many brains, many minds.
It's a group situation.
Yeah, so when error occurs, it's quickly, and so when malicious error occurs, it's quickly found out because other people can't repeat the experiment, for example.
But what you don't know about, you don't think about. If the knowledge isn't there, the database in your own mind.
That's an interesting thought. What you don't know about, you don't think about. I don't know about what happened at creation, but I do think about it.
Just one other thing. You mentioned Einstein.
Yeah.
Now, I always believed that the reason why he was such a wonderful man was he had the ability to use metaphors in his explanations. And to use metaphors is to apply imagination and image. Now, is there any relevance in that, do you think?
Well, that's an interesting question, which comes first, the mathematics or the conceptual?
Right.
And indeed, what counts as true understanding? Is it the formulation of an equation, or is it the interpretation, the conceptual interpretation of the equation? I think I like to think that real understanding comes from the latter, the interpretation of the equation, rather than the equation itself.
But would you...
Because Einstein benefited from having at least one wife who was very good at maths.
Well, you've heard the expression nature or nurture. Now, how much of your own personality or persona do you believe? I mean, we talk about nurture being peer pressure, culture, indoctrination of people around you. But where does this come into your thinking, nature or nurture?
I have to presume that it's 100% of both.
Well, someone else wants to say.
Let's move on to Phil. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor. Can you hear me? Yeah. I suppose it's the ultimate unanswerable question at the moment. The theologians tend to suggest that something from nothing is impossible. But of course they ignore the fact that there's infinite regression, was it turtles all the way down or something. But I don't think that science has an answer to that either, because if you say energy, well, energy has to come from somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Here's the scientific answer to it. Are you sitting comfortably? Let's assess the total energy in the universe, because then we will know how much effort had to go in order to refine it. And we will know how much whoever it was, let's call it God, had to make on day dot of the creation. How do you assess the energy of the universe, the total energy of the universe? Well, you look at a galaxy, you weigh it, that is, you determine its mass, and you multiply that mass by the square of the speed of light. E equals mc squared. So we know how much energy that galaxy represents. We do it for that galaxy. We do it for this galaxy, that one. We do it for every galaxy in the universe. And we add all those energies together, and we sit back totally flummoxed by where did all that energy come from. But we're scientists. And we say, have we included all the contributions to the energy? And there is another contribution. Whenever two objects attract each other, it lowers their energy. This galaxy attracts this galaxy gravitationally. Take that into account. And that original energy that we had is reduced a little bit. We've got this galaxy and that galaxy. Down it goes again. That energy, this energy, down it goes still further. You can see where this is going. The speculation is that if you add all the interactions together, it takes that original whopping, flummoxing great energy down to zero. So, where did it all come from? How much had to be made? Maybe a simple example. Electric charge. We know there's positive charge, we know there's negative charge. Where did it come from? If you add up all the positive charge, and all the negative charge in the universe. We find, and this is observationally true, that there are exactly equal amounts of positive and negative charge. So at the creation, absolutely nothing just fell apart into positive and negative charges. There is no charge. So in other words, what science is doing is simplifying the question that has to be answered. It's no longer where did it all come from. It's how did it fall apart.
Thank you.
Very good. We've got time for one more, I think. Jeremy at the back, if we can just keep the question and the answer fairly brief now, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
I have a very, very brief question. I unfortunately was delayed coming here this afternoon. In fact, I only got here about 10 minutes ago. The reason being... Hear me out and I'll explain. The reason being that as I was pulling out of my driveway, I discovered that one of my rear tyres was completely flat. Fortunately, there is a quick ship only 100 yards from where I live. I was able to take it there and get the flat tyre repaired. But hence my lateness arriving today. Anyway, the reason I mention all that is because having missed your very, I'm sure, inspiring and interesting and informative lecture, could you possibly pinpoint or refer me to one of your books which repeats and articulates the material which you've talked about in your lecture?
I think there are two that I refer to, but both were. One is On Being. You've got a copy there, haven't you? Yeah, it's that. So you can take the details later. And the other is the one we also mentioned a moment ago, which is Conjuring the Universe, which came out last year.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Peter, that was a very, very fascinating lecture, and thank you so much for answering all of those interesting questions as well. I just want to reassure you that in this bag there is something rather than nothing. So will you please take that with our good wishes, and will you please give Peter a round of applause. Okay, just a few notices.